The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus and his disciples arrived at the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. As he stepped out on land, a man of the city who had demons met him. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he did not live in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he fell down before him and shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man, for many times it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the wilds. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "Legion," for the many demons had entered him. They begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Now there on the countryside, a large herd of swine was feeding, and the demons begged Jesus to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When the swineherd saw what had happened, they ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told them how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." So he went away, proclaiming throughout the city how much Jesus had done for him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
God of all grace and tender, fierce mercy, I speak in your name and in your presence, asking that my words would be pleasing to you, guided by your Spirit, and that the hearts and minds of your people would be open to you. Through Christ our Lord, I pray. Amen. Well, this morning we have this remarkable text of the Gerasene demoniac, he's known as. And I wish we could spend 4 or 5 Sundays on it. I promise not to give you 4 sermons this morning. It's a great text. Some of you may have noticed that in the prayer before I preach, I've edited it in the last few weeks. For several years, I prayed, "God of all grace and tender mercy." Recently, I've added to that, such that it's "God of all grace and tender, fierce mercy." This morning's gospel passage is an example of the fierce, tender mercy of Jesus. He will let nothing get in his way to give mercy to this man. Today is also the feast day of our patron Saint Barnabas, and so we had the reading from the book of Acts. By the way, I commend that to you. The reading this morning, I think, is the 13th chapter of the book of Acts. You might read chapters 1 through 15 of Acts this afternoon. It'll take you all of 22 and a half minutes. A great context for the story we have. Saul of Tarsus was a persecutor of the church, and he had many of us know the story of Paul's conversion experience. When he had that experience, he was Saul of Tarsus. Later, his name gets changed to Paul. But because he was a persecutor of the church, when the leaders of the church heard he had this enlightening experience, they didn't trust him. But Barnabas did. Barnabas' fierce mercy looked past all of that, went and found Saul and brought him because Barnabas saw Saul's great leadership gifts and believed in his conversion, and so Saul's name gets changed to Paul. He becomes the great apostle of faith, writes more books in the New Testament than any other author. And over the years, Paul begins by describing himself as untimely born, then the least of the apostles, and finally the chiefest of sinners, because he had been a persecutor of the church. And the fierce mercy of the church went and found him and brought him. So the story of the Gerasene demoniac, a great and at the same time tragic story. About 5 years ago, I preached a sermon at St. Barnabas about demon possession. And a week or so later, a member of the church came to see me and very respectfully and politely invited me to think about talking about mental illness rather than people being demoniacs. And this member has a son with severe mental illness. And so I did think about that, and I began to change my whole orientation. And shortly after that, we started what we call the Mental Health Task Force at St. Barnabas, which has had significant ministry in our church now for going on 4 or so years. I'd like us all to take a breath. The tragedy of mental illness and its impact on us. Now take a breath, because also it's important to realize mental illness is a spectrum. Now this man is extremely mentally disturbed, and take a breath, all of us have a little mental illness. Mental health is a spectrum. Notice the impact on this man. He's isolated, deprived of community, deprived of his dignity, deprived of his humanity. His sacredness as created in the image of God is obliterated. Interestingly, 6 times he's referred to as the man with demons. Not once is his name given. We don't even have his name. We just know him as the Gerasene demoniac. Interestingly, in this story, the grammar's a little complicated, but when it says Jesus and his disciples arrived at the country of the Gerasenes, what the text actually says is Jesus reached his goal. When they set sail, Jesus set sail for the region of the Gentiles, unclean territory. He encounters a man with unclean spirits. He encounters a man unclean because he's in the tombs. He encounters people tending unclean animals, and he encounters the unclean animals, and for Jesus, none of it is unclean. He intended to go there. The territory that his people avoided. And if they found themselves there, they would leave as soon as possible. Not Jesus. He cared nothing, apparently, about notions of ritual impurity. For him, all of God's creation was clean. All of God's creation was sacred, and every human being was a sacred child of God. And Jesus' fierce mercy would let nothing get in his way to care for this man. What he demonstrates is solidarity with this man. Now watch this. This is so powerful. At the end of the story, because of the power of Jesus' presence, the people are terrified of Jesus. He has performed this great miracle. And notice how Luke sets it up. At the end of the story, the man who was naked is now clothed. Let me get my notes. The man who was naked is now clothed. The man who had many demons, now the demons have gone from him. The man who did not live in a house is sent to go home and live with his family in his home. The man who had fallen at Jesus' feet, screaming as loud as he could, is now seated at Jesus' feet peacefully. The man who was out of control and out of his mind is now in his right mind, seated at Jesus' feet. Don't you love it? The people of the town come and they see all this, and the power of what Jesus has done in his presence terrifies them. And again, interestingly, the grammar is complicated, but it says they're actually pressed together, huddled with each other in fear and saying, "Would you please leave? You're too much for us." And Jesus leaves. But watch this. He doesn't leave them alone. He sends the Gentile to them. The man begs to come to follow Jesus, the Gerasene demoniac who's been healed. It's actually, the word is saved. He's been saved from all of it. And he asks to go with Jesus, and Jesus says, "No, go to your home. Go to your town and tell of the great things God has done for you." Now, again, it just begs us to pause for a moment. This guy's a Gentile. He doesn't know the creed. He's not been baptized. And Jesus sends him because probably more than anyone, probably more than Jesus' disciples, he got it. He saw, he experienced, and he could go tell of the great things God had done for him. We're in the 8th chapter of Luke, and this Gentile becomes the first one Jesus sends to carry on the message of good news. And Jesus doesn't leave the people who are just normally human people, terrified, afraid. Something for them awful has happened and they don't know how to deal with it. Jesus says, "All right, I will leave, but I'll send someone to you." They reject him, but he does not reject them. In Luke's gospel, Jesus' mission statement, I'd like to call it his rallying cry. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, to preach good news to the downtrodden, to set the captives free, to open the prison doors of the oppressed, to announce the time of God's favor." And that's what he was doing with this Gerasene demoniac. Now, by the way, I want you to just pause for a moment. So, Jesus intentionally set sail for the land of the Gentiles. he did not get a text that told him as soon as his foot hit the ground, he would be encountered by a deeply disturbed person who would be screaming at him. Didn't get a text, didn't get an email, didn't get a phone call, didn't read it in the newspaper. But he was ready. He was ready. I want you to understand something about me. It's my intention, and y'all have heard me preach this now for several weeks especially, but for years. It's my intention to come to peace, to be a peaceful presence. In my prayers, what I literally say to myself, every step, every breath, every heartbeat, be peaceful. I blew it this week. And actually, what I want you to is, hang on just a second. I want you to understand something about me. I'm preaching this sermon to myself. Cheryl, is the message working for you so far? It's good? It's landing? I just want you to know I'm preaching to me. I'm right here with you, and what I'm about to say is all about me. Okay, are you good with this? And if it lands for you, that's a great thing, but if it doesn't, it's all about me. Thank you very much. All right, thank you. All right. So, this week, actually for about 6 weeks, I've had trouble with my cell phone carrier. Imagine, right? And a problem that to me is very small, it seems to be large to them. I've talked to at least a dozen people that cannot solve my problem. Friday, I talked to 6 different people over the course of, I think, about 3 hours. I asked for managers, a simple problem. And every person that talked to me talked as though they knew nothing about my problem. You understand that? I mean, I've spent hours. I get a new person. I got to start over. I lost it. I completely lost it. Now, by the way, I did not express profanities, though I've been known to do that. And all the time, I'm in this moment. I'm aware that this other person, it's actually a person on the other end of the line talking to me, and they mean to be doing their job well, and they don't mean to be frustrating. They don't mean to be stupid. And I finally, oh, Jesus, help me. Y'all understand this is my confession. You understand that? And when after I finally hung up, and now here's the thing. My job, my calling as a disciple is to not react in that moment. My calling as a disciple is to be just like Jesus the moment my foot hits the ground and the onslaught comes, to bear it and to be a peaceful presence. My job is to spend months and years and decades looking in the mirror and acknowledging the truth of me and saying, Jesus, forgive me. Fill me with your Spirit, change me. Make me a person filled with the Spirit of the living God to be good news in a disturbed, troubled, broken world. I just wish a sign would fall out of heaven and say, the test is just around the corner. But it doesn't do that. That's not what happens. want to invite you. I want to invite you. When you go home today, take some time. Pull out your journal. If you don't have a journal, pull out a notebook. Start to imagine, who are the kinds of people that give you the most trouble? What are the kinds of situations that tend to hook you? Mine's all about technology. Any way it's technology is involved, immediately I'm less patient. And then receive the fierce mercy of Jesus that forgives you and wants to empower you to be a presence in those moments that's different. And understand when you're in that moment, if you can remain peaceful, the heavens are singing. It's the glory of God in that moment. And understand something else. The peacemakers, it's the last of the Beatitudes. I understand the Beatitudes to be a journey. The final Beatitude is, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. The peacemakers are godlike. And it goes on from there and says, those are the people that can suffer persecution. Those are the people that can suffer rejection. Those are the people that can suffer the onslaught of the fear and anger and pain of the human situation and not react, but be peacemakers in that moment. I invite you, look in the mirror. Receive the fierce, tender mercy of Jesus. Be infused with the Spirit of the living God. And then walk out of your house that morning or that day and let your breath be, Jesus, send me. Jesus, send me to be a peacemaker in the pain and trouble of the world.